I would be with him alone.
She has been in a critical accident, falls off of a ledge.
He probably set it up.
But the police ruled it an accident. He had to know everything she was doing.
He had a hand in my sister's death.
Like he was trying to harm her.
There was something creepy about him.
Consider how many times you snap a quick selfie without barely even thinking about it. Maybe it's a couple times a week or even a couple times a day. Isn't it crazy to think about how everyone in life will eventually take one last selfie? It's even crazier to think that there are selfies out there that were taken directly before an actual murder. The following stories tell the tale of 3 absolutely haunting selfies that were taken right before an innocent life was quickly snuffed out. One killer is a greedy man desperate for more money and willing to do anything to get it. Another is a supposed best friend who did the unthinkable and nearly got away with it. And yet another is a heartbroken man willing to do whatever it takes to get his little girl back. Brittney Gargol was a beautiful young girl born on August 31st, 1996. She was known for being fun and adventurous. She was also a very hardworking girl and had high hopes for her future. She had a lot of dreams that she was determined to accomplish. Beginning at only 16 years old, Brittney worked 2 different jobs while keeping her grades up in school. Her goal was to save up money so that she could go to college and pursue a degree in business management and maybe even have her own business one day. In some ways, Brittney was kind of like a tomboy. She loved anything to do with the outdoors and liked to snowboard and enjoyed camping and boating. But she also had a girly side to her. She liked going shopping for new outfits and showing off her new clothes to her friends. One of Brittney's closest friends was a girl named Cheyenne Antoine. Cheyenne had a rough time growing up. She was the child of immigrants. When coming to Canada, her parents had to attend special schools in Canada, which were intended to help children assimilate into Canadian culture. These schools were known for being extremely abusive towards the children who attended and have since been shut down. In fact, they were so bad that they are even associated with thousands of school-related deaths. Because of the horrific abuse and trauma that Cheyenne's parents experienced growing up, they both had problems in adulthood. They struggled with addiction so badly that Cheyenne was taken away from them and put into the foster care system when she was just 2 years old. During that time, she would also reportedly suffer lots and lots of abuse. By Cheyenne's teen years, she unsurprisingly suffered a good amount of mental health problems. She turned to illegal substances to cope and ended up hanging around a really bad group of people. Around this time, she ended up crossing paths with Brittney, and the 2 girls became fast friends. On March 25th of 2015, Cheyenne and Brittney snapped a quick selfie together before going out. The picture was then shared to Brittney's Facebook. The girls are dressed up and their hair and makeup looked perfect. They're both smiling and appear super happy. It looks like any other picture taken of 2 best friends. Little did Brittney know at the time that this would be the last selfie she would ever be in. That night, the girls had planned to go out drinking, but the night went tragically wrong. While the exact current events of the night are unclear, we have the version of events as told by Cheyenne to the police. She alleges that after the 2 of them got ready together, they headed to a local bar. After spending some time there, they headed to a house party. After that, they stopped by another bar called Colonial Bar and Grill, and at this point, it's around 4 a.m. Cheyenne said that Brittney approached an unnamed man at the bar and asked if she could borrow his lighter. The pair strike up a conversation, and she ends up inviting him to hang out with them after. But Cheyenne claimed that she ended up leaving Brittney and the man alone and headed to a local assisted living facility to visit with her uncle. Cheyenne claimed to have no more contact with Brittney that night, and even took to Facebook to message Brittney and express concern for her well-being since she was, after all, alone with a man she had just met. She asked Brittney to let her know that she got home safely and ended the message with a casual, "Love ya." Just hours later, police received a disturbing 911 call. A body of a young woman had been left alone on a local road. The woman was lying on her back and had no shoes on. It appeared that she had been strangled to death. There was a belt next to her body. Police have very little to go off of and don't even have a way of identifying who the body belongs to. They reach out to the public for help by describing some of Brittney's tattoos, but eventually they receive a strange phone call from someone claiming to know who the body belongs to. The person is Cheyenne, and she is all too ready to tell police all about the events of the night before. Police quickly suspect that Cheyenne is hiding something, so they decide to see if her story was true. They check the surveillance footage at the Colonial Pub where Brittney was reportedly last seen alive, but strangely there is no sign of either her or Cheyenne in the bar the following night, nor was Brittney's car ever in the parking lot. Police then interview Cheyenne's uncle, who eventually admits that what his niece told him about what happened that night was different than what she had told the cops. She had told him that she and Brittney were staying at a hotel with two men when a fight broke out over some drugs. She claimed she went to the bathroom, and when she returned, Brittney was lying on the floor, dead. She said the men held her at gunpoint and told her she had no choice but to take part in covering up the murder or they would kill her too. Police interview Cheyenne, but she's completely unwilling to answer any questions. Not long after Brittney's death, Cheyenne went on Facebook and posted the last selfie of them together. She then wrote a lengthy tribute to her, writing in part, "I miss you so much, Bert. I wish heaven had visiting hours so I could come see you. But I'm so glad you came and visited me in my dream last night. I'm blessed to have met you and have you be a part of my life," she began. She concluded the long paragraph by writing, "You always believed in me and I will make you proud of my girl. Rest in peace, my angel." Finally, a woman comes forward who can actually help move the investigation. This woman claimed that Cheyenne came to her house the night that Brittney was last seen. Cheyenne was drunk and hysterical and claimed that she had gotten in a fight with a friend and choked her. And then the police noticed something else. In the selfie taken the night of Brittney's murder, you can see that Cheyenne is wearing a black belt. It looks exactly like the one found near Brittney's body. Finally, Cheyenne is arrested and charged with Brittney's murder. While she stays quiet initially, she finally ended up confessing. Despite this, she was strangely only sentenced to 7 years in prison.
She was a wonderful person whose life was cut short, and it's not fair.
This adorable picture is of a father and his beautiful daughter. This man is Frederick Miller, and the little girl is his daughter Lila. Frederick was 38 years old in August of 2014, and he lived in Landover, Maryland. He was a disabled Marine veteran, and after leaving combat, he took a job at a Verizon store before eventually becoming unemployed. When Lila was still very young, Frederick and Layla's mother split up. Layla was taken away to go live with her mother and grandparents in a different city. Frederick was absolutely heartbroken and desperate to get his daughter back. So he and Layla's mother entered a brutal custody battle that lasted for years. Eventually, a judge gave Layla's mother custody of her, allowing Frederick to have only supervised visits. He didn't believe that he was being allowed to spend enough time with his daughter, so he ended up seeking help from both Veterans Affairs and members of Congress, but nobody was able to offer him any help. On top of that, Layla's mother had filed a restraining order against him. Frederick was frustrated. He had done everything he could to get his daughter back, and he had even paid his ex $11,000 more than he owed her in child support. The court was eventually notified of this, and Layla's mother was demanded to pay the money back. But this was not enough for Frederick. All he wanted was his daughter, and no amount of money was going to replace her. Angry and desperate to take matters into his own hands, Frederick made a terrible decision. He decided that if he couldn't have access to his daughter, he was going to take her himself. So on August 16th of 2014, he got into the car and he headed towards his ex's house. His ex wasn't home at the time, but her father was outside on the front lawn. Frederick shot him before making his way inside. When he got inside, he came face to face with his ex's grandmother. He shot her too, before picking up little Layla and taking her out to his car. He put her inside and took off. Not long after getting in the car, he took this selfie of the two of them. Despite having shot two people, he had a giant grin on his face. Some neighbors that witnessed what happened called 911, and police immediately go out in search of Frederick. A dramatic car chase ensues. He refused to pull over and only managed to escape police for a little while, but eventually he loses a tire. He starts shooting at police before taking off again. He goes a short distance further before shooting at police once again. This time, the officers returned fire, and Frederick was shot and killed. By the time that police get to his car, they find that little Layla is covered in and her throat has been slit open. She's rushed to the hospital, but sadly is pronounced dead. At first, officers fear that Layla may have been caught in the crossfire, but it's later determined that it was not a gunshot that caused her death, but Frederick had actually slit her throat with a knife himself. It's not clear why Frederick decided to kill the daughter he loved so much and was trying so hard to get back. Maybe he was so bitter towards his ex that he felt as though if he couldn't have Layla, nobody else could either. Or perhaps it was some strange act of mercy in his mind. He might have believed that she would likely be shot while caught up in the crossfire, and this was his way of making sure she didn't suffer. We'll never know the real answer because he's dead. Instead, all we have is this haunting image taken just before both lives were lost. This story starts out with what seems at first to be a pretty normal 911 call about a couple who went on a hike only for things to go tragically wrong. A man who identifies himself as Harold Henthorn is in a panic and says that his wife had a bad fall.
Hello, my name is Harold Henthorn. I'm in the Rocky Mountain National Park.
Not long after Harold makes this 911 call, he calls the brother of his wife, Tony. He bombards his phone with countless texts claiming that Tony fell from a ledge.
Very urgent. Tony is injured. Fall from rock. She has been in a critical accident. Falls off of a ledge 140 feet. And she does die there on the mountain that night.
Barry recalled of what was initially told of how his sister died. Barry felt a horrible guilt over what happened. He felt as if he should have been there to prevent the accident.
Being the big brother and supposed to take care of your sister, you can't do it. It's a bad feeling. I need to be there for my sister. And I couldn't.
The couple had been hiking in the Rocky Mountains. Obviously, these are very vast mountains, and people falling to their deaths there wasn't considered too uncommon. After all, many of the peaks were thousands and thousands of miles above the ground. But what was unusual about this particular situation was that this was the second wife of Harold's to die. His previous wife, Lynn, died in a freak accident 17 years earlier. Just as Tony's brother Barry initially thought Harold was a great guy, so did Lynn's brother at one time.
I thought Harold was a great guy, very charming. I thought that this is good. My sister needs a good man like this.
Lynn and Harold had been out for a drive one tragic night when they ended up pulling over to the side of the road due to a soft tire. Lynn's sister recalls what she was told of how Lynn was killed.
She'd been crushed under a car, changing a tire. We all were shocked at the bizarreness, but the police ruled it an accident.
Looking back, it is impossible not to see the similarities in the deaths of Lynn and Tony. Both of them were freak accidents, and both of them were witnessed by one person only, Harold. Was Harold truly the unluckiest guy in the world to lose two different wives? Or was there something more sinister going on? Tony's death occurred in September of 2012 in a strangely beautiful setting, but it's the events leading up to her death that are worth paying attention to. When Tony and Harold first got together, they appeared to be incredibly happy and in love. Tony, a beautiful Southern belle, first met Harold in 1999 after looking unsuccessfully for a partner for a long time. She was 37 years old at the time. Tony's family was very happy that she had finally found the man she had been looking for.
I was extraordinarily happy for my sister. It appeared that she found her true love, and if she was happy, I was happy.
Tony had met Harold through Christian matchmakers, and he seemed to be the perfect match for her. He was romantic and interesting. Also, they had both been through heartbreak, with Harold losing his first wife and Tony's first marriage ending in divorce. Tony didn't know much about what had happened to Harold's first wife, but she didn't want to pry. All she knew that it was supposedly just a bad car wreck.
I didn't want to ask him to elaborate, we just took it for face value.
Her sister-in-law recalled. Tony's parents really liked Harold and thought he was a good match for their daughter.
He said I was just smitten by Tony.
It's not hard to see why he felt this way. Tony was not only very sweet and attractive, but she was a successful eye doctor and surgeon, so she definitely had money.
She loved people, and if she could make somebody feel better, she would, and this started early in her life.
Tony was well respected in her community and known for her high intelligence. It seemed that Harold was a good fit for her as he was also successful. He claimed to be a fundraising consultant.
Work with nonprofits, whether it be churches, schools, or hospitals.
Tony's sister, Barry, didn't really understand what Harold did for work.
I thought that was an interesting but an odd business. And
the couple ended up getting married and moving to Denver, where Tony joined a local ophthalmology practice. But because Tony was very close to her family who lived back home in Mississippi, she would often go back to visit. They were very happy, but there was still something missing from their lives: children. Finally, in 2005, they would welcome their first daughter together, Haley. Finally, Harold seemed to have everything he could ever have wanted. He had a beautiful wife and an adorable daughter. Daniel Jarvis was a longtime friend of Harold's. In fact, they were so close that when he decided to move out of Denver, Harold and Tony even let him stay with them at his house for several months. At first, things seemed pretty normal.
Tony went to work in the most mornings. Harold, he worked down in his basement. He would say that he was meeting with a client, going to lunch, or he was traveling.
The family newsletters that Harold would send out to family and friends depicted a perfect, happy family that had everything they could ever want. But there was a lot more going on behind the scenes that others didn't see. Barry, a cardiologist, had gotten some new CAT scan equipment and was excited to try it out. He happened to end up testing it on Harold, only to find out that Harold's health was actually at a major risk. His arteries were dangerously clogged.
Harold was in the throes of the beginnings of a heart attack.
Barry had caught on to Harold's condition just in time, and Harold was swiftly sent to the hospital for treatment, where he eventually recovered. But it wasn't long after that Tony would have a medical emergency of her own. It was the year 2011, and she was minding her own business when a heavy wooden beam from her family cabin fell down on top of her.
She said, "I saw something on the floor, and if I had not picked it up, it would have killed me instantly. But it hit the back of my neck and fractured a vertebra."
While Tony ended up recovering from her injury for the most part, she still had some numbness in her hands after the accident. This was not something that Tony's mother was aware of.
I didn't learn about this until much later, and I said, "Why didn't somebody call me?"
One-on-one conversation I ever had was with Harold.
Barry was also noticing that something seemed to be up.
If I tried to talk to Tony or Haley, it was always on speakerphone.
Barry believed that this had a lot to do with Harold's uncontrollable need to be in charge of everything. This was the same impression that other doctors that worked alongside Tony would also have. While they absolutely loved Tony, they had a bad feeling about her husband.
When our doctors would have meetings, Harold had to be part of it. He had to know everything she was doing.
The officer manager, Tammy, had a particularly strong dislike for Harold.
He made us uncomfortable. He was kind of, there was something creepy about him. She was not able to schedule anything outside of her normal schedule without first consulting with Harold.
Tammy was surprised when, in September of 2012, Harold came to her and asked her for help in planning a surprise trip to the Rocky Mountains in honor of his 12th wedding anniversary with Tony. He wanted to make sure that she could clear Tony's work schedule so she would be able to go. Tammy had a bad feeling about this trip, but she agreed to go along with it anyways.
It was creepy to me, but she was married to him, and if he was going to do something nice, it was kind of exciting. Maybe for just a moment I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. Maybe he's not so bad.
The entire office ended up getting involved so that Tony would have a clear schedule to go on the trip. One of the ladies even took out their cell phone to record the moment that Harold surprised Tony with the trip. Tony seemed excited and in love, but little did anyone know then that this would be the last time they would ever see her alive. September 29th, 2012 started out as a beautiful day. It was Tony and Harold's anniversary, and they set off on a trail where they would be able to enjoy stunning scenery. Tony had bad knees, so she wasn't particularly one who loved to hike on rugged terrain. But in all the snapshots they took from their hike, she could be seen smiling and appearing to be enjoying herself very much. But it wouldn't be a long time before things would go terribly wrong. Barry recalled the moment that he learned not only of his sister's horrible accident, but of her death through a text.
Urgent. Tony is injured. Critical. Requested flight for life. And then he texts me back saying that she's gone.
Toni had fallen 140 feet off a cliff to her death. It would be Barry's job to take on the unimaginable task of telling his parents that Toni was dead at only 50 years old.
It was like, no, this didn't happen.
It didn't take long for not only Toni's family, but the police to think that something wasn't quite adding up about Toni's death. Harold's version of what happened kept changing. At first, he claimed that she was taking a picture on her phone when she slipped, but at another point, he said she was checking a text message on her phone when she slipped.
I took it immediately as him doing this.
He had a hand in my sister's death.
The friends and family urged investigators to look more closely into Harold's first wife and how she was killed.
Bad luck can happen to somebody. There's no getting around that. But it always causes me, when I see cases like this, to be suspicious.
According to friends and family, Harold and his first wife, Lynn, had a loving and happy relationship. But the way she died doesn't make a lot of sense. How had a simple stop to change a tire gone so tragically wrong, with Lynn ending up underneath the vehicle? A woman named Patricia Montoya happened to be passing by in another vehicle shortly after the incident occurred, and she stopped to see if she could get help. Harold's reaction was very odd.
Kind of angry at us, and I thought that was odd that he got angry after stopping for help, stopping us to help him. He didn't want us to touch her.
Despite it being a freezing cold night, Harold couldn't even be bothered to even take his jacket off and cover his gravely injured wife.
It was creepy. It was like he was trying to harm her. We all said that he probably set it up to where that part fell on her. And that was all of our thoughts.
After hearing that Lynn had died from her injuries by the next morning, Patricia decided that she needed to tell someone about her suspicions, so she went to the police. Despite the fact that she told them that it was absolutely impossible for Lynn to have ended up underneath the car without Harold's doing, they still ended up declaring an accident. Patricia was shocked that the police didn't bother to at least look into the whole incident further before deciding it was an accident.
They should have looked at everything, and they should not have ruled it an accident within a week.
Looking back now, it's safe to say that this incident was likely set up by Harold with the intention of killing Lynn. There are many signs that point to this conclusion, especially the fact that he had multiple versions of the events that happened that night. At one point, he said they had been on their way to dinner, while another time he said they were just returning from dinner. He also didn't have a good explanation for how Lynn had ended up under the car in the first place. Harold might have gotten away with killing his first wife, but was he about to get away with killing his second? Meanwhile, most of Tony's co-workers are very determined that Harold was behind Tony's death.
Co-workers and close friends kind of privately were talking and saying, you know, I really feel bad to say this, but I think that Harold did this.
Finally, investigators made a startling discovery that makes Harold look guiltier than ever. Despite telling everyone that he was a successful businessman, Harold had not worked in 20 years. His income was nothing, which Tony had never been aware of. Police now had an official motive. He would need access to Tony's life insurance to continue living without working. Finally, in 2014, Harold was finally arrested and charged with first-degree murder in Tony's death. During his trial, people would swarm around the outside of the courthouse, determined that justice be served. Investigators look into phone records and end up discovering that the day of Tony's death was not the first time Harold went to the particular peak she allegedly fell off of. He had scoped out the area many times before, essentially planning her. As if that wasn't horrific enough, when Tony's body had been recovered, it was determined that after Harold pushed her off the cliff, he stole the diamond out of her wedding ring. Despite Harold's continuous pleas of innocence, the jury could not be convinced, and he was found guilty of Tony's murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. At last, justice had been served. You could say that in some ways this was justice for not only Tony, but for Lynn as well. Because of this whole case and the bizarre nature of Lynn's death, police ended up reopening Lynn's case. Her cause of death was changed from accident to cause unknown. While so many years have passed, police may never know exactly what happened to Lynn that fateful night, or why Harold ever wanted to kill the women he supposedly loved in the first place. Nor will they likely ever know why Harold's greed was so intense that he was willing to kill his own wife and then spend the rest of his life in prison instead of just going out and getting a job. This selfie of he and his wife together is likely the last picture before Tony's murder, and it is incredibly haunting to look at, knowing what he planned to do just hours after it was taken.